Well, good afternoon and welcome to the University of Maine at Augusta and our most recent Maine State Forum. My name is Dr. Brenda McAleer. I'm the Associate Provost and Dean of the College of Professional Studies here at UMA. It's our hope that as the only public university in the state capital, that we can provide an opportunity for UMA and the community to connect with researchers and policymakers whose important work affects our lives here in Maine. Tonight we're going to be screening the documentary film, The Kids We Lose, in just a few minutes. After the movie, we'll present a panel of experts chosen by the Maine Developmental Disabilities Council to speak on restraint and seclusion of children with behavioral challenges. Our panelists this evening, and as I read your name, would you please stand so the audience knows who you are? Nancy Cronin, the Director of Maine Developmental Disabilities Council. Dr. Ross Greene, all the way in the back. Psychologist, educator, and founding director of Lives in the Balance. Cathy Dionne, there she is, Executive Director of the Autism Society of Maine, and our fourth, Ben Jones, there's Ben, thank you, who is an attorney and education advocate at Disability Rights Maine and a member of the Maine Coalition Against Restraint and Seclusion. The Maine State Forum is supported by a presidential research and innovation grant from our university. This series is coordinated by Professor Mary Louise Davitt, who is in our Justice Studies program on the Bangor campus, and all the way in the back, in the lovely turquoise sweater, is Professor Sharon McMahon Sawyer of the Justice Studies program. I also want to thank Greg Canaboris. You can't see him, but I can see him up in the booth. He's with UMA's Instructional Services Unit, who is managing the technical production of this presentation and the recording of it for future viewing. There will be a question and answer period after the film and after the panelists have made their presentation. To ask a question of the panelists, I would ask that you raise your hand and wait for Sharon to bring the microphone to you. This will help everyone in the audience and on our recording to be able to hear your question. Please join me in welcoming our panelists to the Maine State Forum.
What I think I'm going to do, folks, is offer 10 minutes to you, Ben, 5-10 minutes to Cathy, and then Dr. Greene, we're going to open it up. So, is it working? Push it down.
Okay. Hey. Oh. So again, I'm Ben Jones, and I'm a staff attorney over at Disability Rights Maine, right here in Augusta. And I became interested in this topic after having multiple cases of students who endured these restraints and seclusions and being shocked by even one. And the video was excellent. I've only seen clips of it until now, but it's reminding me why I do what I do, so it felt very good in that way. Anyways, the part that I would like to share is just about the numbers in Maine. So to give everybody a context, this is happening in our backyard, and the numbers are astonishing. Maine restraints includes students at 12 times the national rate. I just did the new numbers this morning, and just to give you an idea of what those numbers are, so we have 6 years of data in Maine for following restraint and seclusion, and that's under this rule called Chapter 33 in Maine. And other states don't have this. Some have similar ones, but as the video pointed out, there's no national standard. There's no levels of which you can restrain or seclude. It's a completely open season on students. So anyway, in Maine, I'll say that back in 2013, which was the first year in which they were kept track, there were 16,000 restraints and seclusions that happened in Maine classrooms, and that has fluctuated, but it has gone up every single year since 2014. So it was down to 12,000 in 2014, and now it's back up towards 20,000. And so there's no ceasing of this use. It is frequent, and when they refer to these alternative schools or these special purpose schools, that's where a lot of these are happening. More than half in Maine of these, let's say 20,000 as an example, half of those are happening to less than 1,000 kids in these special purpose schools. So that sentiment really rings true when a few of the folks were talking about how if you put kids into a situation where they are around other kids having similar behaviors, things don't necessarily get better on their own. It's not a magic box. And so that's just a commentary on that. But so right in our backyard, very, very high numbers, much higher than the national rate. These are scary interventions. You know, they showed I think this video should be required viewing for all school personnel, all legislators, all people. But it helps to see the images, because I think what's happened in Maine, we've identified a problem, we want to reduce these. That was the whole impetus behind this rule. And it has done a little bit of the opposite, which is normalize. And it has made it so that there's tracking of these things, so it's just another thing that school keep track of. And it gives this legitimacy to it, and it seems perverse, but it's just what I've witnessed in individual cases, and then just seeing these numbers climb and climb. And so far, we haven't had any true control over these numbers or oversight. The Department of Education has one employee that oversees restraint and seclusion, responds to complaints, and she spends most of her time just chasing down schools to get these numbers. So at least we do have these numbers, but she is at capacity, and she doesn't have the bandwidth, and we haven't given her enough power or given the DOE enough support in order to address these things, and they really need to. They're very scary. And luckily, in terms of the national law, we have the IDEA. A lot of these students were likely under IEP plans, that everybody knows what those are. And because of that, they have many, many rights attached to them. So I'm able to do my job, and if I have an individual student who's being restrained or secluded frequently, I can see that as a failure of their program, and I can address that. I can get them supports, I can get them into a different setting, and I can make a difference on that individual level, but this is a pandemic. I mean, this is just happening in every school at different levels, but it is normalized, and I think we should do something about it. So, thank you.
Hi, I'm Cathy Dionne, the Executive Director for the Autism Society of Maine. And I think one of the things that we see, at least in our office, autism, obviously, we have a lot of individuals that have some behaviors that come out around that. We do know that most of those behaviors are coming out because of lack of communication. They're not able to get their needs and wants met. Their sensory, the environment around them can cause certain things. So we want to work with the school systems to understand why this is happening. And right now, we don't see that. We take in about 1,600 calls a year. Out of those 1,600 calls that we take in, 60% are due to school issues. And when you even dwindle that down further, you're looking at a lot of them are coming to us saying that they think that their child is being either restrained or secluded. We really hand things off to DRM, Disability Rights Maine, when that comes up, because, you know, I only can give them the paperwork that says, you know, you have rights here. And everybody that we come in contact with, they don't even know what their rights are. Parents have no idea that there is Chapter 33 and there's laws, and we give them a brochure that we developed to let them know about that. Families don't even understand that. So we're here as an advocacy group to really pass on that information, let them know what their rights are, and hopefully we can help stop what's happening. I think it might be a higher number of individuals on the spectrum that we're seeing restrained. I can't prove that. Does the data show numbers disability-wise?
Yes.
No, it doesn't. Not the main numbers.
Not the main numbers.
The
So-
national numbers do.
So yeah, and hopefully maybe
And
we
actually,
can hear that.
before you go, may I say something?
Of course.
So one of the things that really struck me about this is the number of children that, I'm the executive director of the Maine Developmental Disabilities Council. My name is Nancy Cronin. And I'm also the mother of a child with dyslexia and ADHD. And I watched the behaviors that my son does almost every day. And I'm lucky enough to be in a school in which he has not been restrained and secluded. Other things have happened though, and other challenges. And I think of the 1 in 5 children who have dyslexia in our state and have ADHD and have challenging behaviors. And I am a woman who has tremendous knowledge about the IEP and the systems and have access and find it hard every single day to do what's right for my child. So I look at this I just needed to say, as a mother's point of view of a child who is not being restrained and secluded, but doing these behaviors, and I hope they don't. They're probably more scared of me than anything. It is incredibly important to change how we treat kids who go to school, work 4 times harder than everybody else, sometimes, and do not understand what's in front of them. I thank you for making this film, and I'm going to give you the floor.
Well, I guess the main thing I always say is that we have to remember that restraint and seclusion and paddling and expulsion and detention and suspension are things that occur often as acts of desperation, almost always after a challenging behavior has occurred. But they flow from a mentality that is oriented toward focusing primarily on a kid's challenging behavior and trying to modify that behavior. But by my way of thinking, the behavior is just the signal. I refer to the behavior as the fever. All the behavior does, and by the way, this is whether it is whining, pouting, sulking, withdrawing, crying, or screaming, swearing, hitting, spitting, biting, throwing, destroying. I don't slice the pie that way. Behavior's behavior. Behavior communicates that a kid is having difficulty meeting certain expectations. In my line of work, we call them unmet expectations. In my line of work, we call them unsolved problems. They are highly predictable. They can be solved proactively so that we don't find ourselves in the heat of the moment where we do all of those things that you saw in the film. So it's one thing to know that the stuff you saw in the film is utterly counterproductive. It's another thing to know that the things you saw in the film are utterly unnecessary and are byproducts of ways of thinking about behaviorally challenging kids that are completely obsolete and practices that are increasingly viewed as obsolete. We should not be modifying behavior. We should be solving the problems that are causing those behaviors. Because those problems are predictable, 99% of intervention can be proactive. The best use of a crisis management strategy is to never have to use it. But we seem to be heading in a different direction because in many states, and I get to go all over, what teachers are now being trained in is even further from crisis prevention. They are being trained in how to deal with an active shooter. Once the kid starts shooting, you are way late to the game. So the key words for me are counterproductive, unnecessary, but it requires that we change our lenses and it requires that we change our practices. away from focusing on behavior and treating it in a way that is very punitive, thinking that somehow that's going to get the message through, to recognizing that the frequent flyers in our schools and the ones who often end up in facilities mostly can be characterized by the large piles of unsolved problems that they drag around with them every day. Those are the problems causing their challenging behaviors. They are predictable. They can be solved proactively, so the things that you saw in that film don't happen. I've now seen the film about 8 times. The first time I watched it, I went into atrial fibrillation. It was so disturbing, and I kid you not, I was out of rhythm for a day, 24 hours. Didn't get me quite as stirred up this time, but it was intended to be a very moving, humane look at what truly goes on out there and how difficult it is not only for the kids, but also for their parents, and also for the people who end up working with them, because they all need tools. I think we accomplished the mission. Although, last thing I'll say is I was at 2 screenings of the film in Philadelphia last week, and I've come to the conclusion that the film is a Rorschach test for one's capacity for empathy. Because, and this was just a few of the comments, but there were a few comments that suggested that because the kids in the film didn't look like somebody or weren't of the same socioeconomic status as somebody or weren't from their state, people were having difficulty relating to what was going on in the film, which blew me away. So it's my new Rorschach test for empathy. My attitude: if that film doesn't make you feel something, whether your kid's been manhandled or not, if that film doesn't make you feel something, something's up.
All right. So we're doing a number of things in this state that we're hoping will help. One is we have an LD coming up. We don't have a number yet. But what we are hoping will be accomplished by this LD is there'll be a requirement to collect data, and there'll be a requirement to do something about schools that have a tremendous amount of restraint and seclusion numbers. You know, the goal is to change. The other thing we're hoping to do is we're hoping to work with some agencies to do a pilot to see if we can eliminate it in one place. If that works, it will take 20 to 25 years to actually get that in through the system. Don't hear that as hope. Systems change happens about as fast as well a flea can get from here to Cape Cod. So I want to open it up for, but recognition is still important and movement is important. Even a flea can make it to Cape Cod. So I would like to open this up to questions, and I wish every single seat in here was filled. I think we've got this one, and then we've got Zebra, and then we've got 3. All right, we're going to wait for the microphone, and I'm going to keep track.
Hi.
Hi, I can hear you, and it's working.
Okay. I do think that one aspect I want to inquire about is how much help families are getting in terms of sharing, or how much collaboration there is in terms of sharing successful interventions, successful ways of calming a kid down, or understanding even what the problem is. We talked about those budget numbers there, and I think the number that we spend on schools, we need a lot of one-on-one for some of these kids, and I'm on our town council. That's hard to get those numbers up, but I think we need to say, hey, this is something we have to address, taking those numbers from the prison system and putting them into our school systems. But I would like to know how you feel, how important it is also for families to get supports in addressing behaviors that are a problem.
I think I'm going to give this to Cathy. I will first say that you have 3 members here, the Autism Society of Maine, Disability Rights Maine, and the DD Council, who are also part of the Coalition Against Restraint and Seclusion, who is sponsoring this. Forgive me, I kind of am doing my speech in reverse today. But I will give this to Cathy because she has talked about this quite a bit.
One of the other things I'll share with you is I also am a parent of an adult son who's 25 years old who has autism. He's completely nonverbal, and he had self-abusive tendencies. So getting support for families is really key, because you have to then be able to handle a child that has multiple areas of therapies, from occupational therapy to speech therapy to a specialized school to any type of therapeutic. Sometimes it's horseback riding, sometimes they're going to even physical therapy. So we really need to help support those families, and we always say to the family, look to your local community. Don't stay home. They really do feel sheltered. They stay in their own homes because sometimes the environment is not, their child reacts to the environment. So we have to teach them how to go out into their communities, how to be involved with certain things so they don't feel isolated and alone. We have a lot of families that feel isolated and alone. Our agency will help, but we only know when they call us. So, you know, we do try to get out there and try to help them. We have a one-on-one program that we can support the family, let them know where there is some agencies that would help them. You know, like I said, we have a good connection with DRM, and when something's getting really out of control, we want them to know so they can kind of come in and assess the situation. So we do try to do that a lot, and they do need a lot of support.
Yeah, Maine Parent Federation also exists,
Yes.
but I will also say, you said you're a town councilor. Thank you for your service. I am a selectman. And one of the biggest challenges is there are about 150 small towns in this state that are called minimum receivers, which get very small amounts of funding from school. The only funding they get is 40% of their special education costs. I have sat in way too many meetings in these small towns in which the town talks about those kids get the money and not those kids. Another way that we are going to have to look at this as citizens is making sure our communities are inclusive as well, so that it's not those kids, but all kids count. Our next speaker is here.
Thank you. Actually, I have 2 questions. Is that okay?
Of course it is.
All right. The first one is, I hope you're planning a screening for the legislature and for the cabinet. I'm sure the cabinet would benefit from seeing this. My second question is about the 1,000 incidents, or was it 1,000? No, it's half the incidents, 1,000 kids in the special.
Sure, yeah, so.
Yeah. Is that a high, are those 1,000 kids, is that a high number to have in those special schools?
I'm not aware of that. You mean in terms of percentage of the overall kids in the state being
Right.
in? Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure of that. Just on the number though, so of those 20,000 restraints and seclusions,
Yeah.
over 10,000 of them are happening to 900-ish kids. And
You know, one of the reasons I ask that is because I do know that services for kids have diminished over the last few years. And if that was a reason, more kids were ending up there instead of other resources. That's all.
So that's 2 points that I'd like you to talk briefly about.
Sure.
Well, one I'd like you to talk about. The other is we are going to be offering a 40-minute screening, thank you, Dr. Greene, to the legislature. The cabinet's a great idea. And one thing that you can do to help is contact your legislators and ask them to go to it. And make sure that they know that restraints and seclusion is a big deal. And we need to take the steps towards eliminating it.
Do we have a date yet for that?
No, we don't, because we were purposefully waiting for the LD number, and then we were going to get 2 weeks before the LD public hearing, we were going to get it shown. So that is the strategy about that. But you can make a big difference. And the other thing that I was hoping you might talk about, Ben, is potentially talking a little bit about the true eroding of children's service systems and the wait list that many of these children are experiencing to get help in the community, and how that also does translate directly into the schools.
Yeah, I'm not as much of an expert on the community service system. We have two people here that are, but it is very much reflective of the same needs of the school. So there is services such as Section 28 school-based services, and those are few and far between, but those can be the difference between a kid staying in their mainstream school or at least down the hall from the mainstream class and having supports within the school to being shipped off to one of these special purpose schools. So there's definitely a shortage. And in terms of wait lists, there's wait lists for in-home supports, and maybe Cathy can speak to this too, but Section 28, 65, which is HCT services, and those are so important too, because as people have alluded to, is when the student, when they go home, it's not a clean, I'm going to work, I'm going home. This is one child that is spending time throughout their day, and so the more seamless and the more supportive that whole system can be, the more successful they're going to be in both places. So I don't know of the specific stats of how many people are on waiting lists, but
you might have difficulty asking this because you see her every day, but it won't be as unpleasant if I make her angry. Katrina is right here and she's behind you. Do you know anything about the wait lists for children?
Yeah, so we have in Maine certainly hundreds of children waiting for any number of services in the community. And I think we have also hundreds of children who are ending up in much more restrictive and inappropriate settings and facilities across our state because they're not able to access those services.
Thank you, and thank you for being well, you know where I am most of the time, so you can get something dangerous like I hate snakes, so that would be a very bad thing for me. The next question is right here.
Hi, my heart is pounding. I am an emotional, I feel inside emotionally in turmoil, because what I saw on that screen was what I live with, you know, with some I have one child with ADHD. I have another child who is borderline autistic, you know, and dealing with the school systems. Not on top of the girl that has the ADHD, she has type 1 diabetes to take insulin. That little girl has suffered immensely because of the system. I felt like I've had to be her advocate because every time I turn, you know, she was self-harming. It was just like, you know, crash and burn, you know. And as a single mother, I'm thinking, oh my God, what can I do? You know, I feel like at a loss. So I'm reaching out, trying to get and they did the seclusion. She had to be hospitalized, you know, and one of the times that, and when they can't find a hospital, she gets stuck in the emergency room for days, left alone, other than a guard being out there. You know, nobody, you know, I was there as much as I could, but, you know, some mothers work, you know, and it's very difficult. So trying to get an IEP done, you know, because of her diabetes, oh, we said in one meeting, and they said, oh, how can, if we approve this, I said, no. See, I learned from the hospital, thankfully there was an advocate there who said, oh, this will happen, and it did, you know, because I had to stand up. But going through all of the difficulty in the steps and watching her restrain is horrifying. And what if they hadn't done that? You know, maybe her recovery could have been a little bit sooner, you know, but she went through that. She's doing much better. But I'm wondering how we you know, I know that you're doing the thing but how is we as a community, can we help these children? How can we get the message across? I know that we're trying, but to reach out to the community. I felt isolated. I still feel isolated, you know? But to, I guess to get the message of what you're trying to say about the positive things, you know, at least, you know, even if we can't get the people in the school, get the message out to the people, and how could we do that?
Well, I think you have several organizations here represented here that are interested in doing that. I can speak for my nonprofit, Lives in the Balance, and a lot of our focus is in Maine, but we're actually focused internationally. But we have created a mechanism for people to get involved. So if you were to get on the Lives in the Balance website, livesinthebalance.org, in the upper nav bar, if you went to the advocacy section, you would find out that you could become what we're calling an advocator. And in the short time that it's been up, we've had about 2,000 people sign up already.
That's awesome.
So clearly there are people who are interested in helping out and in pitching in. And so sign up to become an advocator, and we'll give you stuff to do. Little known, the U.S. House of Representatives, probably not among these circles, but the U.S. House of Representatives last Wednesday, a week ago, had a hearing on restraint and seclusion. We want to make sure that the film gets in front of every member of that committee, the Education and Labor Committee. Little known, 2 congressmen from Virginia, U.S., are reinvigorating the Keep All Kids Safe Act. We've got to get the film in front of them. So the nice thing is we now have an impactful, moving film that it's hard to watch without being persuaded that these things need to end. Next project, let's get it in front of the decision makers. Here in Maine, we've got to make sure that certain people see that film. Pender Macon needs to see that film. Janet Mills needs to see that film. Lots of people need to see that film. I'm convinced that if enough people see that film, things will start moving in the right direction. Sign up to become an advocator, and you'll help us out.
We have somebody in the back, and then we have Katrina. And then we have a woman in the front. The first way of getting a problem solved is to name it and show it. And that's this video. This movie does that in a very profound way.
Hi, I'm just kind of curious. I work in a school that does do the restraints and seclusions. And with this bill that you guys are talking about right now, what will happen if you can't get it out of the way? What are going to happen to the kids that are still performing these behaviors, and all the tools that you give the teachers and the staff do not work anymore? Where are they going to go if there's no more schools available to help them?
It's a great question. The bill would not do that. The bill would not eliminate restraint and seclusion. The first thing I learned in my field is you do not replace a coping mechanism. You don't take it away with another one we need education. We need to minimize this, and we need to have teachers and folks feel that there are other ways of doing this that don't harm kids. So chapter 33, I remember being in the room when we were advocating to get it passed, created a wave of fear in this state, and a wave of lawyers telling schools how to get around the new rule. And it wasn't intended to, we would love to see restraint and seclusion go away, but we really want kids to be actually able to get served, and I think that's what teachers want too. So it's not, so we need to look at it in a slightly different way, and we need to name these things without fear so that we can make things better.
Just to add on to that, my experience, because we've implemented the model that I originated, but it's not the only non-punitive, non-adversarial model out there, so I'm not pushing my model. But when we implement this model in schools and inpatient psychiatry units and residential facilities and prisons, Long Creek included, we're not going in saying, you got to stop doing this before you have anything better to do. You're giving them something better to do. And then, once they get good at that something else, they no longer have a need for detention, suspension, expulsion, hitting, restraint, seclusion. So it all depends on what door you're going through. As I said in the film, we made that mistake with inclusion. We threw inclusion at people before we prepared them for what was coming. And you know what? That didn't work so well. You don't just say get rid of restraint and seclusion. You say, how do we treat these kids better and in ways that are more effective? And if you're treating kids in ways that are more effective, you have no need to lay hands on them anymore. And by the way, these kids will always be there, so I'm not as worried about people's jobs.
No, that's for sure. All right, we have Katrina, who is the next, and then we have Nancy. Well, that's easy to remember. That's my name too.
So I'm trying to think of a way to formulate my question. I think I have a statement and then a question. So one important piece here, at least in Maine, and I'm sure across the country, that really goes unnoticed is the use of restraint and seclusion and other emergency interventions in residential treatment programs. Here in Maine, those, there's a high frequency of use of those types of interventions that I think, as Ben said before, really just become part of the norm and part of sort of what you can expect to receive when you're, in that setting. And so I'm equally, I think, worried about those settings as I am, schools and hospitals and correctional facilities. One challenge that we have in trying to address that and get clinicians to look at what are more effective ways is just that, getting clinicians sometimes to look at different interventions and different models that, could be used. And so I'm curious if you have any suggestions of ways that you've obviously been effective in convincing programs to implement non-punitive, non-adversarial interventions, and would love to hear any thoughts you have on that.
The author Ken Wilber, and I don't like the terminology, but he distinguished between conscious incompetence and unconscious incompetence. So it depends on what we're dealing with. When a school or facility contacts Lives in the Balance and says we need help, that's conscious incompetence. They know what they're doing isn't right, they're just not sure what to do instead. That's a little bit of an easier road because they're already recognizing what we're doing now isn't working. With unconscious incompetence, they don't even yet know that what they're doing isn't working and isn't okay. Those are actually two different prongs, right? Conscious incompetence, you already know what you're doing isn't working and you just need other tools, give them tools. Unconscious incompetence. Sometimes you got to impress them with data. I would say that this is more a film, no offense to anybody in the room, this is a good film for the unconscious incompetence because it helps them come face to face with, here's what you're doing. Here's the impact you're having. You are re-traumatizing the already traumatized. And sometimes you need a very powerful message to get that message through. But now, true confessions. 40 years ago, you would have found me as a psychiatric technician on an inpatient psychiatry unit in Miami, Florida, pinning kids to the ground and throwing them into seclusion rooms. That was me 40 years ago. But it also taught me some good lessons. Here's lesson number 1. I was told that if you sat on a kid and whispered in his ear, if you don't calm down, you're going to have to get a shot. I was told that it would calm them down. False. First thing I noticed. If you sit on a kid, he doesn't calm down. But here's the more important thing that I noticed. We'd put everybody in harm's way, staff included, on Monday, pinning a kid to the ground or throwing the kid in a padded room. They would always get the shot, by the way. Thorazine, Haldol, something. They'd pretty much pass out for the rest of the day, and then I'd come on for my shift the next day. This is probably my most important lesson as a mental health professional. And what I noticed is that all of the problems that were causing the behaviors that caused us to pounce on the kid on Monday were still there waiting for us on Tuesday. And pouncing on a kid doesn't solve a single one of them. So it almost perpetuates itself. It was the norm on that unit. It was what I was taught to do. A lot of people, that's what they're taught to do. We got to teach them to do something else.
All right, Nancy. Oh, I'm going to ask you to, here it comes.
As I watched the film, I noticed the different socioeconomic levels of people and their own personal problems. And I have 2 clients, autistic children, and they are well-educated people, you know, financially okay, as you can be with an autistic child, because they're very expensive. But the paperwork to get into programs, to fill out that paperwork, seems so difficult. I wonder how these poor people, some of them I'm sure who haven't even gone to high school or gotten through it, are able to do that. And how many kids are out there and not receiving any help because parents don't know and can't fill out paperwork. That's a big concern, because the kids that I work with, well, I love both of them, and you see such potential in them, and it just makes me so sad to think of the children that aren't getting anything because mom or dad can't read or write, you know, or can't understand or have the same problems the child have. And what can the state do about that?
I'll take this one, Nancy, if you don't mind.
Go right ahead.
It's exactly what we see. The first question that we ask when somebody calls us and they're saying, we don't think the parent cares. My first question is, do you know if that parent has their own disability? Because a lot of the times they don't think about that. They think that, well, they're here just to deal with the child and get them services, but they're not thinking that the parent doesn't have the capability to either read the forms, fill out the forms. I helped a parent just the other day who needed respite. We have respite in Maine. And I was amazed that that application was 15 pages long. I was like, oh, I didn't realize this was so big. You know, we refer a lot of people for that. But I had one parent who said, I need a little help. And when I looked at it, I was like, well, no wonder you need a little help. This is huge. So part of what we do at my agency is I called people who are running the respite and said, okay, I'm looking at your application here. Tell me truly, what do you need filled out for this parent? Because I'm looking at some of the things that I didn't think that they needed, and they guided me through it and helped, so then I could turn around and help that parent. It is enormous. Maine Care application. Talk about confusing. We can't tell you the applications that we help, and we've actually had Maine Care come to our office and give us a training. And when they left, we were more confused because they have so many avenues that you can get in with services. So how does a parent navigate that?
Well, exactly. And then if the case manager is not on it, They lose
Exactly.
their main care.
Exactly. Yeah,
So
so
it
that's
is-
part of what we do in our office is we will help families and guide them and fill out applications for them and even point them in the directions of, did you realize there was this service that was available? So, yeah, it's difficult, very difficult.
Our next question is up there.
As you're moving the mic back, I want to tell you something that somebody in Philly said after watching the film last week. She said she couldn't relate, just because you brought up the socioeconomic diversity that we tried to infuse into the film. She said that she couldn't relate to the film because there weren't any rich people in it.
That's rather stunning. I want to make a couple of, well, one suggestion, one recommendation, or maybe two recommendations. One, in terms of folks who might want to see it, or a place where this would be beneficial, would be perhaps showing it at the annual conference of the Maine Educators Association, the MEA annual conference. If
Is
you
it the
haven't already.
MADSAC?
It's the MEA Association.
Maine Education Association.
I think this would be a wonderful addition to their annual conference. So that's a recommendation. Anyone who really digs this work, I highly recommend Dr. Greene's books and approach. But the best conference I've ever been to in my life was your conference last October. And it was local. I don't know if it's normally local, but it was in Portland.
Always in Portland.
Okay, it's always in Portland. So I would definitely recommend that. My question is, as a parent who would love their school system to adopt non-clip chart approaches to working with kids and that sort of thing, what suggestions would you have for a parent advocating for their school to look at some of these non-punitive approaches or models?
Find somebody in the building who you think will be a good person to talk to about that, and have them help you know what you should do next. There's no template. I mean, it's easy for me to say, give the principal a copy of Lost at School.
I was wondering if you have a discount for buying your books in bulk.
They're free. I order a care package. Oh, no, they're not free. I don't know. We try to give everything free away on the website, but books we have to buy. But find somebody in the school who you think will agree with you so they can give you the lay of the land. I think that's probably the most important step. Otherwise, you could end up beating your head up against the wall with people who aren't the right people to talk to yet.
My kids have had very good success in the school, but I know many other kids haven't. So I don't have a particular grievance to file with them, and it leaves me with not very good standing. But they know that what they're doing isn't working well. And so that, I feel, is an opening. But
Whoever they is are people who you should begin having the conversation with.
I will continue it. Thank you.
I wonder if the school board.
We have a question right here, and I would also say there's an amazing amount of people who towns that need people to run for office. There's another reason it's why I'm a selectman.
I'm actually a day treatment teacher, so my room is the last step before the places that you were talking about, and mine is a high school, so we do not do restraints or seclusion for a couple reasons. Number one, some of my kids are bigger than me, so that's ridiculous. Number two, my room is supposed to be a safe, supportive room where they can talk to me about anything and everything, and then we start learning. You can't learn if you don't feel safe. But my question was, there's a lot of things for autism, but if you have a kid who's dysregulated mood disorder or anxiety or some of the other smaller ones, where do you go for them? And then to tack on to what Nancy had said earlier, how do you get this out to other parents? Because I deal with parents who don't believe in mental health issues or who don't believe in medication or who don't believe in counseling. So you can get the schools to change and do things, but how do you take it out so that the parents do too?
hard.
It's a delicate balance, very delicate balance.
And the process of being a parent, of, you know, the process of dealing with it takes it is challenging to hear your child is not succeeding. And there is, and then there's the next level of how much do you believe, and then there's the do you medicate, and then there's the social media, and then there's the, and then there's the, and then there's the. My son has anxiety as well, and it's which one? Oh, and another piece to this is, which Nancy kind of alluded to. Many people. Dyslexia is genetic. I was a special ed kid. ADHD is genetic. Autism has a strong genetic component. There's many things, and it's significantly harder if you are somebody who may have had a bad experience in school yourself. So I wish I had a better answer for you. I don't, other than with the compassion of what you're saying, as well as what the families are going through every day.
I was on the phone with a principal of a school on my drive up here from Portland this afternoon, and he was saying that he felt his hands were tied because if a kid acted up in his building, he felt that he had to do something punitive and extract a pound of flesh because the other parents expected him to do that. So I spent a half hour talking him off the ledge and said to him, the other parents want to know that you know what you're doing, and they want to know that their kid is going to be safer at school because of what you're doing. Because out of the other side of his mouth, he was telling me, suspensions don't work, detentions don't work. I said, so you're already halfway there. You know that the things you're doing now aren't working, but you're telling me that you're still doing them because the parents of the well-behaved kids think you should, but you know they're not working. So you probably have to change what you're doing and change what you're saying to those parents who really can't relate. I find that the parents who have to think about behavioral challenges the most are the ones who have a kid with behavioral challenges. Otherwise, it really doesn't come across your radar screen. And otherwise, it becomes very easy to just point at the kid with behavioral challenges and scream, extract the pound of flesh. I don't know a lot of folks who think about autism unless they have a child who's autistic, right? It doesn't come across their radar screen in a big way. So it's almost like you have to be affected by it before you start to care about it really deeply. But I think that there are very poignant messages that can be given to parents who can't relate. But the most important one is the data tell us detention, suspension, restraint, seclusion don't make things better. The data are there, right? That's why it's the same 10, 20, 30 kids in every school who continue to access the school discipline program and account for 80 to 90% of school discipline referrals, right? Because it's not working. The data tell us it's not working. We just haven't done a very good job of getting those data out there and into the public consciousness. That's what advocators are going to be doing. That's what this film is just the beginning of Lives in the Balance's efforts to get that into the public consciousness.
We have a question up here, and then we
I
have
guess
another
I'm
comment
just
down here.
coming at this from a different way and sort of a response to the film and the idea of showing it at an MEA event. I happen to be on the board of directors for the Maine Education Association. I don't say that I'm speaking for them right now, but I was worried about coming here to begin with because I work in this field and I do restraints and seclusion, and I've been trained in 3 different programs over 18 years. But I grabbed onto the part of the movie where it said the teachers have the best of intentions. Yes. And I guess I'm also looking for more collaboration. This needs to be shown to the Superintendent's Association and the School Board Association because we're fighting for our lives during this budget process. And at 18 years of service and not making yet $30,000 a year for what I do, the problem isn't those people in the trenches. And if this were shown at an MEA event, it would traumatize us. I mean, truly, we're trying to work in Gorham on traumatized, informed schools, and we're talking about how we're tapping into our own issues, and it's not the teachers that are the enemies here. I have to say.
One of the things that was in the film but got sliced out regrettably, there was more in the film. We had to get it to 90 minutes. I didn't know that. I've never made a film before, and I didn't make this one either, but I was integrally involved in the editing process. There were lots of images of teachers striking, teachers having a great deal of difficulty making enough money as a classroom teacher to just plain live, the trauma of being in a classroom with lots of kids who are out of control. A lot of that stuff was in the film, and regrettably it got taken out because we had to get under 90 minutes. It was a bit more sympathetic to it ended up, I don't think that it's a teacher bashing film, and that would have been over my dead body, but there was more sympathy for educators in the film in earlier renditions of the film than in the final rendition of the film. It was regrettable, but as I've learned to say, that's the movie business.
We have one more question. We have only enough time for one more question, because 7:30 is our cutoff. Okay, then we've got two. So she Sabra yielded.
I just want to say real quick. I just want to thank everyone here that is involved and for the movie. I'm here for journalism class. I'm a student at UMA, but I watched the trailer last night and I knew it was going to be emotional. I didn't know it was going to be this emotional. I have a nephew who, honestly, Tyler, I mean, he's in a psych situation right now, and for years it's been nothing but, hard work. Anyway, it's been a lot, and I just thank you guys for this. I honestly can't wait for my sister-in-law to see it, for him to see it. I mean, it's going to be honestly good to, that sounds weird, but for him to be able to be like, okay, I'm not the only one, you know? So that's all. Thank you.
I really want to thank the panelists. I want to thank UMA, and I want to thank you for coming. And I would love to see opportunities to show this film more. Thank you very much.